What would you do if following orders meant leaving children to freeze to death? February 1945, Northern Germany. The European war was entering its final, desperate month. As Allied forces pushed deeper into the Reich from the west and Soviet armies advanced from the east, the roads of Germany became choked with refugees, millions of civilians fleeing the collapsing front lines. Among these forces were Canadian reconnaissance units, tasked with a simple mission: observe, report, and avoid civilian entanglements at all costs. But on one frozen night, Sergeant James McKnight and his four-man crew would face an impossible choice, one that would force them to decide between military discipline and basic human decency. This is the story of how 5 soldiers risked everything to save 18 lives that the war had already written off as acceptable losses. Sergeant James McKnight, 28 years old, came from Manitoba's farming country. Before enlisting in 1940, he'd spent his entire life working the land, weathering brutal Canadian winters where temperatures could kill livestock in hours. That experience with cold, real, killing cold, would prove critical. By February 1945, McKnight's reconnaissance unit had been operating in northern Germany for 3 weeks. Their current assignment was textbook military procedure: establish an observation post along a strategic road junction, monitor German troop movements, and radio intelligence back to headquarters. The team consisted of 5 men. Corporal Davies from Toronto, tough, reliable, a soldier's soldier. Private Wilson operated the radio equipment with practiced efficiency. Private Patterson, barely 19, was the youngest, still carrying photographs of his family in every pocket. And Private Kowalski, the crew's strongest member, a man who spoke fewer than 10 words on good days, and none at all since they'd crossed into German territory. Their position, abandoned farmhouse with clear sight lines to the road, was strategically valuable but brutally exposed. The thermometer clipped to McKnight's pack read -5 degrees Celsius. The wind chill drove the effective temperature far lower. This was the kind of cold that froze exposed skin in minutes and killed unprepared humans in hours. They'd been maintaining this position for 36 hours when the crying started. At first, McKnight thought the wind was playing tricks. The howling across the frozen wasteland created strange sounds, whistles, moans, echoes that seemed almost human. But this was different. "You hear that?" McKnight asked Davies. "Hear what, Sarge?" Then it came again, faint, distant, but unmistakable. Children crying, multiple voices, weak and desperate, coming from the direction of a bombed-out town they'd passed the previous day. Nothing but rubble and broken walls. This presented an immediate problem. Their orders were explicit: maintain position, avoid civilian contact, report enemy movements only. The Canadian command structure had made its position abundantly clear during briefings. The roads were packed with German refugees, tens of thousands fleeing Soviet advance from the east. Old men, women, children, all desperately trying to reach British and Canadian lines rather than face the Red Army's notorious treatment of German civilians. But the Allied armies were not relief organizations. Resources were stretched thin. Every truck, every medic, every ration was allocated for military operation. The official policy was harsh but pragmatic. German civilian welfare was Germany's responsibility, not theirs. McKnight knew exactly what headquarters would say if contacted. "Not our problem. Maintain your position. Contact German authorities." But what German authorities? The civilian administration had collapsed. Police forces had either fled or been conscripted. The military couldn't protect its own retreating units, much less civilian refugees. People were dying in ditches, freezing in abandoned buildings, starving in the snow, while the machinery of war ground forward, indifferent to individual suffering. The crying grew louder. McKnight could distinguish individual voices now, young voices, some crying, some calling out in German, words he couldn't understand, but the meaning was crystal clear. "Help us! Please help us!" "I'm going to check it out," McKnight said. Davies stared at him. "Sarge, we can't leave our position. Orders are—" "I know what the orders are," McKnight interrupted. "But I also know what I'm hearing. Those are kids, Davies, little kids." Wilson raised the obvious concern. "What if it's a trap? Germans could be using kids as bait. Wouldn't be the first time." It was a legitimate tactical consideration. German forces were desperate now. Some units were fighting with fanatical determination, using any advantage available. Ambushes, false surrenders, civilian cover, all documented tactics in the final months of the war. But McKnight's instincts said otherwise. Traps were calculated, controlled. This crying was neither. It was weak, hopeless, the sound of children who'd given up expecting rescue. "Then we'll find out together," McKnight said. "But I'm going. Anyone who wants to stay here, stay. No judgment." Nobody stayed. That was the thing about soldiers. They complained constantly, questioned every order in private, but when their sergeant walked toward danger, they walked with him. Not because regulations demanded it, because that's what soldiers did. The bombed-out schoolhouse materialized through the snow like a monument to destruction. 3 walls still stood. The roof had collapsed on one side. Every window was blown out, leaving dark rectangular voids staring like empty eye sockets. The front door hung at an impossible angle from a single hinge. McKnight had walked past this building yesterday afternoon and dismissed it as completely dead. Just another corpse in a country full of them. The crying was coming from below. A basement. McKnight pushed through the broken doorway. Inside was somehow colder than outside. No wind, but no warmth either, just dead, frozen air that seemed to absorb heat from living things. He found the basement stairs. Half had collapsed, but enough remained to descend carefully. What he found in that basement would stay with him for the rest of his life. 18 children huddled together in the far corner like animals trying to share body heat. The oldest appeared maybe 12 years old. The youngest couldn't have been more than 3. Their lips were blue. Their skin had taken on a greyish pallor that McKnight recognized from finding frozen cattle on the Manitoba farm. Some weren't even crying anymore, just staring with empty eyes that had stopped hoping for anything. They'd been down here at least 36 hours, McKnight estimated, maybe longer. No heat, no food, no water except snow. Some of the older children had wrapped younger ones in their own coats, holding them close, desperately trying to keep them alive through sheer proximity. When the children saw the Canadian soldiers, several screamed. These were enemy soldiers, men who bombed their cities, men who killed their fathers, men in foreign uniforms carrying rifles. For a moment, nobody moved. Then the smallest child, a little girl with blonde hair matted with ice, started crying again. Not the hopeless sound from before, something different. The crying of a child who sees adults and thinks maybe, just maybe, someone will help. McKnight made his decision in that frozen basement. He didn't think about military protocol or regulations or what his commanders would say. He thought about his kid sister back in Manitoba. He thought about what his mother would want him to do. "We're taking them," he said quietly. "All of them." Davies stared at him. "Sarge, our truck fits 8 people, maybe 10 packed tight. There's 18 kids here, plus 5 of us. That's 23 people total." McKnight was already moving, checking each child. The 2 in the corner weren't responding when he touched them. Their skin felt like ice. Severe hypothermia. If they didn't get warm in the next hour, they'd be dead. "Then we make it fit," he said. "Start bringing them up. Carefully, some can't walk." The crew moved with military efficiency. Kowalski, the strongest, carried 3 of the smallest children at once. Patterson took 2 older boys who could barely stand. Wilson helped a girl who looked about 10 but weighed almost nothing. Starvation, compounding the hypothermia. McKnight carried the 2 critical cases himself, one under each arm, trying to be gentle while knowing that speed mattered more than comfort now. Getting them to the truck was only the first problem. The truck bed measured exactly 6 feet wide by 8 feet long, 48 square feet to fit 23 human beings. Mathematically impossible, but impossible didn't matter anymore. "Out with the equipment," McKnight ordered. "Everything except radio, medical kit and weapons. Everything else goes." They worked like a machine. Spare ammunition boxes, toolkits, extra fuel cans, rations they'd been saving. All of it went into the snow beside the road. When finished, They'd maybe doubled their space. Still not enough. "We'll sit on the benches," Wilson suggested, pointing to the metal benches running along both sides of the truck bed. "Put the kids on the floor between us. Pack them tight." It was the only way. They loaded the smallest children first, positioning them near the cab, where engine heat would reach them. The older children filled in around them. McKnight made sure the 2 hypothermia cases were placed directly against the metal wall separating the truck bed from the engine compartment. That wall would be warm, not warm enough, but better than nothing. The children were too scared and cold to resist. Most didn't even seem to understand what was happening. A few of the older ones tried to say something in German. "Thank you, maybe," or "Please don't hurt us." McKnight couldn't tell. When all 18 children were loaded, the crew climbed in. They sat on benches with children pressed against their legs, wedged between their boots. Kowalski had a small boy sitting on his lap. Davies had 2 girls leaning against his sides. There was no room to move, barely room to breathe, but everyone was in. McKnight grabbed the radio handset before starting the engine. He had to report this, had to tell someone what they were doing. The radio crackled. "Command post, Lieutenant Davidson." "Base, this is Recon 4. Report." McKnight chose his words carefully. "Base, we've encountered 18 German civilians, children, critical condition, severe hypothermia. We're transporting them to the nearest Allied medical station." Silence. Long enough that McKnight thought the radio had died. Then Davidson's voice came back, sharp and cold. "Recon 4, negative. You are not authorized to transport civilians. Contact German authorities in the nearest town and—" "Sir, there are no German authorities," McKnight interrupted. "These children will be dead in 2 hours if we don't move them now. 2 of them might already be past saving." Another pause. McKnight could picture Davidson at the command post, probably with officers standing around him, all of them thinking about regulations, proper procedure, what headquarters would say. All of them knowing that saving children wasn't part of the mission. "Recon 4, you are ordered to maintain your observation position. You cannot abandon your post for—" "Sir," McKnight's voice was steady but firm. "I'm not abandoning anything. I'm requesting permission to complete a humanitarian evacuation. If you deny that—" "Permission? I'm doing it anyway, and accepting whatever consequences come after." The radio went silent again. Everyone in the truck held their breath. When Davidson came back on, his voice had changed, softer, more human. "The nearest medical station is 42 kilometers west. Route passes through potentially hostile territory. 3 towns we haven't fully cleared yet. If you get into trouble, I can't send help. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir." "Then get those kids to safety, Sergeant. I'll deal with headquarters. Davidson out." The drive was 4 hours of calculated crisis management. The truck's heater was designed for the cab, not the open bed. McKnight had them rotate children every 15 minutes. Those near the warm engine wall moved to the outer edges. Those from the edges moved to the center. Keep the warmth moving. Keep the blood flowing. They shared their water. 1 canteen between 23 people. Each child got 2 small sips. Not enough to matter physiologically, but enough to wet their mouths, to remind their bodies that water existed. Patterson had chocolate in his pack. He broke it into tiny pieces, 1 piece per child. Some were too cold to chew. He let the chocolate melt in his palm, then let them lick it from his hand. McKnight kept checking the 2 critical hypothermia cases. The girl was responding slightly. Her eyes would focus sometimes. She tried to curl up tighter when he touched her. That was good. That meant her body was still fighting. The boy worried him more. Too still, too quiet. McKnight pressed his own warm hands against the boy's chest every few minutes, trying to push heat into him through sheer willpower. They passed through the first town without incident, abandoned, everyone gone. The second town had German civilians on the streets, old men mostly. They stared at the truck full of children but didn't move, didn't try to stop them or help, just stared. The third town was different. German soldiers, maybe a dozen of them, young, 15, 16 years old. The final scraps of Hitler's army. They had rifles. They looked confused, angry, desperate. Exactly the combination that got people killed. Davies had his weapon ready. So did Wilson, but McKnight shook his head. Don't point at them. Don't even look aggressive. We're just passing through." The truck rolled slowly down the main street. The German soldiers watched. One, an officer maybe, stepped into the road, raised his hand. Stop. McKnight's heart hammered. If shooting started now in this packed truck, children would die, lots of them. Then one of the older girls stood up, wobbling, weak, but standing. She called out in German, fast words McKnight couldn't follow, but he heard one word repeated: kinder, children. The German officer looked at the truck bed, really looked, saw the pile of frozen children, saw Canadian soldiers sitting among them, not guarding them, but protecting them. His face changed. The anger drained away. He lowered his hand, stepped aside, waved them through. Nobody in the truck breathed until they were a mile past that town. The Allied medical station appeared through the snow like salvation. 3 large tents with red crosses painted on white canvas. Trucks parked in neat rows. Soldiers moving with purpose. When they pulled up to the main tent, doctors and nurses came running. They'd been radioed ahead. They knew what was coming, but knowing and seeing were different things. "Get them inside now," a British doctor shouted, grey-haired, steady hands. "The 2 hypothermia cases first. Move, move, move." The medical staff worked with practiced efficiency. They had heating blankets ready, warm water bottles, hot soup. They took the children one by one, checking them quickly, sorting by severity. The 2 critical cases disappeared into the surgical tent immediately. The final count came 2 hours later. All 18 children alive. The girl with hypothermia was responding to treatment. Her core temperature had been 28 degrees Celsius when she arrived, 9 degrees below normal. She'd been 9 degrees from death, but she was warming up. Her heart was beating stronger. The boy was in worse shape, core temperature of 26 degrees. His heart had nearly stopped twice on the operating table. The doctors worked on him for 90 minutes straight, warming him slowly, carefully, bringing him back from the edge, 1 degree at a time. He survived, but he'd lose parts of 3 fingers on his left hand and 2 toes on his right foot. Frostbite damage too severe to save. Small pieces of himself that the cold had claimed as payment for his life. 2 other children had frostbite as well. One girl lost the tip of her left pinky finger. One boy lost parts of 2 toes. 15 of the 18 children escaped with nothing worse than mild frostbite and malnutrition. In that frozen wasteland, in those conditions, it counted as a miracle. The military police arrived while McKnight was writing his report. 2 officers. Neither looked happy. "Sergeant James McKnight, you're to come with us. There's an inquiry." The inquiry dragged on for 3 weeks. 3 senior officers, a colonel, major, and captain, sat behind a folding table, looking at McKnight like he was a problem they needed to solve. "You left your assigned observation post without authorization," the colonel said. "You transported enemy civilians against direct orders. You put your crew at risk by driving through unsecured territory. Do you understand the severity of these violations?" "Yes, sir." "Do you have anything to say in your defense?" McKnight thought about the crying he'd heard, about the children's faces, about how cold it was and how little time they'd had. "No, sir," he said quietly. "I did what I did. I'd do it again." But something unexpected happened. The story got out. A reporter heard about it from a medic who'd been at the station. He wrote an article. Other newspapers picked it up. Within a month, people across Canada and Britain knew about the sergeant who'd saved 18 German children. The military brass found themselves in an impossible position. They couldn't publicly punish soldiers for saving children. The headlines would be devastating, but they also couldn't ignore that McKnight had abandoned his post and disobeyed direct orders. So they did what bureaucracies do when faced with impossible choices. They did nothing. The inquiry quietly closed with no formal charges, no punishment, but also no commendation, no recognition. McKnight and his crew went back to regular duty like nothing had happened. The war ended 3 months later, May 1945. Germany surrendered. The shooting stopped. McKnight returned to Manitoba in July, back to the farm, back to the quiet life. But in the spring of 1960, 15 years later, he got a letter. The return address was from Germany. Inside was a photograph, 5 adults standing together, smiling. All in their 20s or 30s now, all healthy and alive. Behind the photograph was a letter written in careful English. "Dear Sergeant McKnight, we do not know if you remember us. We were children you saved in February 1945. We have been searching for you for many years. We would like to meet you and thank you properly." 6 months later, those 5 adults flew to Canada. They met at McKnight's farm on a bright October afternoon. They told him what had happened after the medical station, how aid workers had helped find surviving family members, how some had been reunited with parents who thought they were dead, how they'd grown up in a Germany trying to rebuild itself from ashes, how they'd gone to school, gotten jobs, built normal lives they wouldn't have had without a cold February night and a sergeant who refused to follow orders. Before they left, the 5 Germans presented McKnight with a wooden plaque with all 18 names carved into it. Some had died in the years since, disease, accidents, the normal tragedies of peacetime, but most were still alive, still out there in the world, living because of a choice 5 soldiers had made. The story made newspapers again, international coverage. The Canadian military, embarrassed that they'd never officially recognized what McKnight had done, finally issued a formal commendation in 1963, 18 years late. But better than nothing. The impact went beyond McKnight and those 18 children. Military historians documented more than 40 similar instances in the final months of World War II, where Allied soldiers had broken protocol to save enemy civilians. Most had faced punishment. Most had never been recognized. In 1968, representatives from several countries used McKnight's story as a case study while updating the Geneva Conventions. They added new language about protecting civilians in war zones, about the moral obligation soldiers have to help non-combatants in distress, even if those non-combatants are technically enemy nationals. McKnight never knew how much his decision had influenced international law. He died in 1987 at age 70, surrounded by family. His funeral was attended by dozens of people, including 8 adults who'd once been frozen children in a German basement. Modern militaries still teach McKnight's story. They use it in ethics classes, in leadership training. They ask young officers the hard questions. What do you do when following orders means letting children die? What do you do when doing the right thing might end your career? What matters more, the rules we write down or the values we claim to believe in? McKnight didn't have easy answers. He just had a moment in time where he heard crying in the snow and made a choice that saved 18 lives, a choice that proved that even in history's darkest chapters, we still have the capacity to recognize each other's fundamental worth. We still have the capacity to choose kindness when kindness is the hardest possible choice. This was just one of countless untold stories from the Second World War. Subscribe to WWII Records as we continue to bring these forgotten chapters of history back to life.